The ancient Egyptians left an indelible mark on human civilization, building awe-inspiring monuments, temples, and tombs, demonstrating remarkably precise engineering, all to honor their pharaohs as living gods. Many were crowning achievements of the Old Kingdom. The first great flowering of Egyptian art that began 4,500 years ago. The pyramids of Giza stand as enduring and mysterious relics. Massive structures raised to ensure the afterlives of three all-powerful pharaohs, Menkaure, Khafre, and Khufu. The pharaoh who built the oldest and the biggest pyramid of all, the Great Pyramid. The last surviving wonder of the ancient world. The Great Pyramid is 481 feet tall and is made up of 2.3 million blocks, some weighing as much as 50 tons. The whole structure weighs almost 6 million tons. That's the equivalent of 16 Empire State Buildings. For 38 centuries, it was the tallest building on Earth. What's more, it's an incredibly precise piece of engineering. The 755-foot sides vary in length by less than 2 inches. It's not just the exterior building that's extraordinary. Inside is a complex of passageways and chambers built from one of nature's hardest rocks. The stonework is so precise that even a credit card cannot slip between the blocks, all constructed by a people who hadn't discovered the wheel.
The accuracy of the Great Pyramid is something that makes me stand in awe.
The first Egyptologists tried to blast their way to the truth with dynamite. They forced their way into the pyramid's secret chambers. But they may have destroyed more than they uncovered.
Dynamite especially might have obliterated clues left behind by the ancient Egyptians, telling us more about the pyramids or how they were built.
Now archaeologists are using the latest technology to search for wonders hidden deep within the stones.
I really actually believe that the burial chamber of that king is still hidden inside the pyramid.
But for other archaeologists, it's the buildings themselves that are the true wonder.
The greatest mystery about the pyramids is not secret chambers, it's how the Egyptians managed to build them with the technology they had.
The ancient Egyptians didn't master pyramid building in one leap. It took long years of trial and error, and one near disaster for them to evolve from building simple mud constructions to the Great Pyramid at Giza. The first pyramids were built on the west bank of the River Nile around 2600 BCE. The earliest design was the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, possibly the oldest stone building on Earth. Rising 204 feet from the desert sands, this was a breakthrough in the history of construction. It didn't have smooth sloping sides, but instead rose in a series of levels or steps. The first flat-sided true pyramids were built 60 years later by the pharaoh Snefru. His son Khufu built the Great Pyramid, the first and largest of the 3 pyramids at Giza. And then, a series of smaller, highly decorated pyramids were built at Saqqara. How the Egyptians built these giant superstructures using the simple technology of the time is an ancient mystery. The first challenge was to survey the site and mark out the pyramid in the correct alignment. They chose the site with care to ensure that the bedrock was capable of supporting many millions of tons of limestone. The ancient architects then marked out the building so that each side was aligned to the points of the compass: north, south, east, and west. Today, we would use digital compasses and laser sighting equipment, but the ancient Egyptians had none of this technology. Instead, some experts think they look to the skies. By observing where the polar stars rise and set, it's possible to calculate true north. First, the architects built a semicircular wall to act as a flat horizon. On this wall, they could mark the rising and setting points of a particular star as it rotated around north in the night sky. A line drawn exactly midway between these marks would point due north. Using just this low-tech method, the Great Pyramid was aligned with breathtaking accuracy. It is off true north by less than 1/20th of a degree. Engineer and pyramid rider Robert Bauval has aligned modern buildings himself. He is astounded by the accuracy achieved by the ancient Egyptians.
It beats me how they did it. I've set out buildings with optical instruments, with the aid of cranes to place the stones, and sometimes I don't get them that accurate.
The United Nations is using satellite imagery to help coordinate the emergency response. Hundreds of communities in this red zone in the Philippines had damaging winds in excess of 120 kilometers per hour. It was double that near the eye of the storm. States of calamity have been declared on islands across the archipelago. And take a look at these before and after images. We know much of Tacloban has been completely destroyed, but it wasn't just coastal communities. This inland town was wiped from the map. And on an island to the west, this town of 36,000 people suffered widespread devastation. Well, typhoons are common in the eastern Pacific, but this one was quite literally off the scale. It had winds in excess of 300 kilometers per hour before it hit the Philippines. That's faster than a speeding racing car. And in the face of that, very little we humans can build would be left standing. Mike Armstrong looks at the terrifying power of this typhoon.
When people use the phrase off the charts, they're usually exaggerating. Not this time. Typhoons and hurricanes are categorized on a scale of 1 to 5. Haiyan could be a new number.
If we had a category 6 scale in the Atlantic Ocean, it could very well have been right at that threshold if we set one.
A storm qualifies as a hurricane if it has sustained winds of 119 kilometers an hour. At that point, it's damaging roofs and breaking branches. As it moves up, things get worse quickly. By Category 3, trees are snapping and uprooting. By Category 4, buildings start losing roofs and walls. Category 5 is catastrophic. Areas can be left uninhabitable for weeks or longer. That's what the Philippines have gone through. In fact, to qualify for a Category 5, winds have to be 252 kilometers an hour or higher. Haiyan was more than 50 above that, more than 300 kilometers an hour. Experts at the University of Western Ontario study wind and its effects on buildings. They say basically, other than nuclear reactors, nothing is built to stand up to a storm like Haiyan.
We really don't design common structures or houses, schools, and things like that for these kinds of wind speeds.
Canada's last serious hurricane was Juan a decade ago. 8 people were killed and it did $300 million worth of damage. The winds from Haiyan were twice as strong as Juan. According to experts, that could mean damage 5 to 8 times worse. The Philippines are suffering. Any country would be.
We would see very, very similar damage. The houses would be wiped out. I think we'd be hard-pressed to say we would be doing any better. It's just an overwhelming kind of storm.
One thing that does make the Philippines a particularly bad target is elevation. It's low. The 6-meter storm surge ripped through communities along shorelines. In fact, unlike most storms, Haiyan was actually gaining power as it made landfall. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
Well, the winds are really starting to escalate here in Tacloban. Strong gusts. The power's been knocked out. Tree branches have been flying through the air. And we're still about an hour away from the worst of this typhoon. It's really, really going to hammer this city hard.
No sudden weakening, last-minute wobbles, deviations in track. Nothing can save Tacloban now. November 8th, 2013, 6:50 a.m. The eye wall hits. The Hotel Alejandro takes a beating, but the thick concrete walls protect us from the violence unfolding outside. I believe the worst is over, but that proves to be a grave miscalculation. Seawater starts pouring into the streets of Tacloban, and then the hotel.
So we have storm surge starting to flood the ground floor of the hotel. Residents are evacuating up to the second floor. rising quite quickly, just be aware, okay? Right, let's get this fella up.
Mark and Josh evacuate the retired mayor of Tacloban to the second floor.
Watch out. Alright. Well done, gents. It's okay. Thank you so much. Don't worry, it's okay.
Panicked guests trapped in a flooded room try to smash their way out. The waterfront neighborhood. A whole community here, wiped out.
The Pyramid Temple is also the best example of what I'm terming megalithic erosion. The massive stone blocks that make up the internal masonry here show just tremendous levels of erosion. When walking around the remnants of the structure, you often have to look closely to see just where the original surfaces were. These blocks were all, originally, cut and finished with flat faces and square corners. In some places, you can still see where the faces were inset to receive the granite casing stones that covered and interlocked with the limestone core masonry on both the inside and outside of the so-called temple.
And the one on top of it as well,
Yeah.
shows that. So the temple was encased in and out with granite stone, which we see the ruins of it everywhere.
At the mortuary temple, there are only a few of these granite casing stones still remaining, the vast majority of them having been quarried and taken from the site. To get an idea of what it might have been like, you only need to take a look at the Valley Temple, at the other end of the causeway, which, due to being at a lower elevation, was deeply buried in sand, thus protected from most of the quarrying, and still has the majority of its remarkable casing stones. On the bare southern wall of the Valley Temple, you can observe the same inset pattern in the limestone core masonry, also present at the Pyramid Temple, that allows the granite casing stones to lock into it. This original granite casing would have served another purpose in terms of erosion. It would have effectively protected the limestone core from the elements and effects like wind or sand erosion, presumably for millennia, which makes the level of damage to the stone that we can see here in the Pyramid Temple even more perplexing. Remember these casing stones, as they're an important part in this story. Before we get into specific examples, it's worth explaining a little bit about the restoration and repair work that's been done here by the Ministry of Antiquities over the last century or so, as it's often mistaken for original work. It's even used to suggest a geopolymer origin for some of these blocks. In this case, the geopolymer label happens to be accurate. Cement is a geopolymer, but it's modern work. This entire structure is quite literally falling down due to the erosional damage, and it's been extensively buttressed and repaired in an effort to slow down or halt this process. In some places, it's quite obvious. You can see here the large blocks cemented into place in areas of deep erosional damage. But in others, it's less obvious, as the bricks and blocks have been plastered over with cement, and then that's been textured and painted to look like the surrounding limestone.
Also, look at this one. This is not the stone itself, but they took pieces of the fallen stone and they flattened it on top of the surface, because if you look here from the side, you will see that the erosion was this deep. And it goes in the entire stone.
Yeah, and they filled it in. Yeah.
And they filled it in. Same like here.
Yeah, it's all repair.
Yeah. Why the other blocks don't have it? Because it used to have other course of stone in front. Look here, for example, the Ministry of Antiquities fill the erosion with these blocks of stone. So this is a restoration, because the erosion is severely reflected on the inside.
Once you notice the repair work, you can see just how extensive it is. Not for nothing, but this is also very common to see on the Old Kingdom pyramids, as well as at many other structures. There's been a lot of work done to shore them up. While it's a good thing that the structures are being preserved and prevented from deteriorating further, it's also creating details that aren't really true to the original form. Or in some cases, like that of the basalt pavement to the east of the Great Pyramid, these repairs are forever hiding away details that may reveal more clues about their manufacture and construction. Ultimately, these monuments become something of a facsimile of the original, never really true to it. This process is happening rapidly to the huge statues in places like Karnak and Luxor. The original and lost granite is being replaced by concrete sculpting and paint. Like this statue here that's painted to look like granite. This is something I find somewhat ironic, as the exact same replication and imitation process was going on in pre-dynastic times, when primitive people were painting clay pots to imitate the older and far more remarkable hard stone vases. Today, we're doing the same thing. We're just using cement sculpting and paint to imitate the granite. While I get the need for repairs and support to prevent a wall or a structure from falling, like the work that's been done at the Pyramid Temple, I'm not really a fan of trying to recreate or replicate something that is already in pieces. I'd much prefer that we display the pieces and let our imagination and minds do the work. The great head of one of these statues in front of Luxor Temple was far more interesting when it was on the ground, enabling a close inspection. But if you want to see it today, it's over 30 feet up in the air, crowning a comparatively rough concrete facsimile of the original piece. Although it does make for a nice photo from a distance, and I don't think that most regular tourists are going to notice the differences between the modern concrete and the original flawless granite, I'm not sure it's ultimately a good thing. It's one of the reasons that I was pleased to hear that the proposed project to rebuild the granite casing of the third pyramid at Giza was halted. You know it was never going to look like it originally did, and concrete would have been used extensively. I'm all for mapping out the stones and trying to digitally reconstruct it, but we're never going to get it back together exactly right. So, in my opinion, the details of this structure should be left as they are, authentic. I really do wish they'd have kept on digging that hole though. Clearing off its original base and exposing the bedrock foundation would enable us to learn volumes about this incredible structure. Returning to the Pyramid Temple at Giza and the topic of erosion, a good example of it is this large notch that's been carved across several blocks in the central structure. The full extent of the erosion isn't visible today as it's been repaired with concrete at one end. And in other places in the temple, it seems clear that similar erosive notches in the stone have been filled with blocks and concrete. A great example of the damage this erosion has caused over time can be seen at the front of the structure, where it connects with the long causeway running down in elevation to the Sphinx and Valley Temple, and where there are still just a few of the granite casing stones in place. These casing stones would have, originally, entirely covered the huge front wall and entrance of the temple. The megalithic limestone masonry behind, or rather in between, these granite blocks, as the walls here were also cased on the inside, have been so badly eroded that the stack of them has just toppled over, due to nothing more than erosion. These are no small stones that could be easily dislodged, roughly 11 meters long and more than 2 meters wide, yet the accumulated erosive force over time was enough for them to eventually fall. The block that was originally on top of the one that we're examining here today lies in front of it.
And then I noticed the truth. As you can see, the casing stone here, that used to encase the entire temple.
Yeah.
Just like the Valley Temple down there. And as we mentioned before, that this block here
fell.
It used to be on top of this one here.
Yeah, and some people think this is like evidence for some sort of ramp, or they were taking blocks here, but this actually fell out. It's a stupid idea, yeah.
This is according to his YouTube research. But we see the height of the lower block. This is a separate block from that one, and they are separated right here. And we can see the line of erosion. The original width of the block is from
there.
here until here, of course.
Yeah.
And the same for the one that fell.
Yeah.
So as we can see, the deterioration kept eroding and eroding until they could no longer support each other.
And it fell. Yeah.
Just by realizing that, I looked at the rest of the structure, and you can see the entire structure is actually falling apart, not from recycling.
From erosion.
From erosion.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's crazy.
It is. Well,
it looks really old.
It does seem quite old. Yes,
We,
that's.
of course, need more investigation about this, but it's not hard, because if you compare the other stones that were exposed, and we realized that the difference in stone masonry.
Yeah.
Down there in the valley temple, the same quality of stone is over there, and it was exposed. It was not even under a casing stone of granite.
Another thing I've heard said is that perhaps the structure was built with already eroded blocks, an idea that I really don't think holds much merit. Erosional patterns in the stone are consistent from one block to another, as we've just seen, and this is clearly the result of this same effect over time working on the structure. We can also see the finished nature of some blocks that were protected from erosion by other parts of the structure, and to me it's quite clear that these were all originally cubic or rectangular blocks with flat faces and square corners.
Yeah, the erosion and how it's connecting between the two blocks.
Yeah, it does. It's a strange erosion.
Of stones above and behind, which used to have another course of stone on top of it or in front of it, was not exposed. So we cannot say that the stone was already eroded or something like that.
Right.
The stone eroded, of course, after it was built.
Yeah.
And look at all the filling that was created by the Ministry of Antiquities. The entire temple. No exaggeration. All around. It was not just one softer block that was eroded. This entire section that is filled with smaller blocks of stone, and then a layer of coating of cement
To make it look like old limestone.
Look how eroded. Yeah. Look at this.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy, and this isn't, and it's not soft stone either. This is hard.
We all know the toughness of the nummulites.
Nummulitic limestone.
Calcified.
Limestone.
Yes, it's not a soft stone, no. So it's all around, on both sides.
Another observation that I've often heard made is that the erosion in places looks like it was caused by water, and not just rainfall, but even wave or current action. We'll get into the scientific details of water erosion on limestone a little later in the video, and while I can understand the observation based on the shape of some of this erosion, there are a few issues with the idea. It's certainly possible that at some point, many thousands of years ago, sheet floods or the like might have come across the Giza Plateau, and in fact there's strong evidence for floods at least in the lower parts of the plateau, even some records of them happening during the Old Kingdom. At the bottom of the plateau, the lower end of the causeway, the Valley Temple is thought to have functioned as a harbour during the annual inundation of the Nile. In fact, a new scientific paper came out in May 2024 that suggests these structures were on the original banks of a now extinct branch of the Nile River, named the Aramat Branch. Interestingly, this branch only existed when the North African Sahara Desert was a savanna-like environment, with large river systems and lake basins, and ultimately a lot more water, meaning a much wider river with branches like the Aramat being hydrologically possible. This period, where the Sahara Desert was in fact a savanna, stretches back to more than 12,000 years ago, and it ended somewhere between 5,500 and 5,000 years ago, 3,500 to 3,000 BCE roughly, in the late Holocene. This is many centuries before the dating of the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom, which is somewhere around 2,700 BCE. So why would the Old Kingdom Egyptians build a harbour here? Nearby to the Valley Temple, the impressive and megalithic Wall of the Crow, which is at a similar elevation, may well have functioned as some sort of water barrier or hydrological control point. Again, it seems strange that we're seeing features here on the plateau that appear to be designed for a water system that simply didn't exist during the established time frame for the Old Kingdom. Although it's possible water reached this level during the annual inundation of the Nile during those times, it would have been far less than the level of the water during the Savannah period, when the Aramat branch of the Nile was some 260 metres wide, or 853 feet. There's something else going on here. Let's also not forget that Zahi Hawass himself dropped a core drill down in front of the Sphinx Temple, which is in this so-called harbour area. He drilled down something like 16 metres or 52 feet, and he hit red granite, which is not a natural part of the limestone plateau, and he reported this in his paper, The Discovery of the Harbours of Khufu and Khafre. This is clearly evidence for something underground, and the remnants of this drilling experiment can still be seen if you take a walk out in front of the Sphinx Temple. So, while individual floods are certainly possible, I have a little more trouble with the idea that large bodies of water might be responsible for the erosion that we see at the other, higher end of the causeway, as it's a different story when we climb up to the level of the pyramids. As mentioned, the plateau has a distinct slope up to the west, and at the top end of the causeway, the level of the pyramids, you're at a significantly higher elevation than the Nile Valley and surrounding desert. Up here, you stand at a height above the head of the Sphinx, and you can look out across the Nile Valley that modern Cairo is built in. Single sheet floods or rainfall events alone are unlikely to have caused the erosion that we can see at the Pyramid Temple, even if they reach this level. Suggesting that there was flowing water running up here for any significant length of time would have meant a truly enormous body of water. Something else, other than single events, must be responsible for the severe erosional features on display, and I think that it's most likely time and natural processes. This brings us to one of the major contradictions to be found on the Giza Plateau, something I've noticed and researched in the last couple of years, and the topic I hinted at in the introduction. That is, that not everything labelled as 4th or 5th dynasty shows this sort of erosional damage. In fact, a lot of the less famous structures on the plateau are, quite frankly, in great shape. Take the Western Cemetery, for example. Located to the west of the Great Pyramid and attributed to Pharaoh Khufu, these 4th dynasty structures are at the exact same elevation as the Pyramid Temple of the Middle Pyramid. They're made from exactly the same type of nummulitic limestone, and just look at the surfaces of these blocks, only a hint of erosive damage. The structures of the Western Cemetery were all supposedly made by essentially the same people as those who made the Pyramid Temple. In fact, going by the Orthodox timeline, this area is supposedly older than the structures on the Middle Pyramid, as Khufu was the father of Khafre. Not only that, but these were never cased in blocks of protective granite, as were the limestone blocks of the Pyramid Temple. So, we're looking at the same stone, at the same elevation level, made by the same people at roughly the same time, all without protective granite casing, yet we only see a bare fraction of the level of damage from erosion. Here are some of the limestone structures in the tombs and mastabas to the south of the Great Causeway. Again, we see the same thing. Limestone blocks of Old Kingdom work which were never cased in granite and still in quite good condition. They're lacking severe erosional features. Here's the difference that you might have already noticed. These Old Kingdom structures are, quite obviously, of a different construction style to the more megalithic work. The blocks are much smaller, and the masonry work is still quite linear and fine. The severe erosion is found only on the more megalithic structures, the ones that use huge stone blocks and those that are often cased in granite. At the higher, exposed levels of the Valley Temple, we can find similar erosive damage in its limestone blocks. You can see the same thing in the Sphinx Temple, which is stripped of all but a handful of its original granite casing stones. The now exposed south face of the Great Pyramid, viewable after they removed the boat museum, can now be seen up close, and what's left of the casing stones here show severe erosional damage, Several feet of the tough Tura limestone has been eaten away, and extensive modern repairs have been made in this area. Even here, in the core masonry at the northeastern corner of the Great Pyramid, there is a bedrock section that happens to be carved from a natural flint nodule, which is one of the hardest types of rock and used to carve granite and other hard stones. This flint section, part of the natural bedrock, was carved as an integrated piece of the Great Pyramid. It seems to show significant wear and damage, although it is possible some of this damage might have occurred as the result of the quarrying or removal of the casing stones and outer layer. This comparison of the erosive damage that's found between the smaller blocked, less sophisticated structures and the larger megalithic and often far more complex buildings is not just limited to the Giza Plateau. It's a phenomenon viewable in plain sight on many of the Old Kingdom pyramid sites in Lower Egypt. At Saqqara, severe erosion is visible on the massive casing stones of the Wanis Pyramid. Yet, the Step Pyramid, made from similar limestone, but of much smaller blocks, lacks any evidence for significant erosion, and it is, at least in the Orthodox timeline, considered to be much older. This, at least to my mind, presents a significant conundrum to the Orthodox timeline. We have here a case of structures all, according to that timeline, built around the same time period, from the same stone, by the same people, in some cases at exactly the same elevation level, and presumably subject to the same natural erosive forces that occur over millennia. Yet anyone with a pair of eyes attached to a brain can witness the obvious and distinct differences in erosional damage to the larger, more megalithic works, which, in many examples, were also protected from said forces, likely for millennia, by huge blocks of granite. It just doesn't make sense in the context of the established timeline, but it does begin to make sense if we hypothesize that the megalithic structures are in fact considerably older than the smaller block work of the Old Kingdom. I've said many times that the history of construction and even destruction of the sites in ancient Egypt is far longer and more complex than is readily apparent to the eye, and that's certainly true at the Giza Plateau. I think there were many different periods of construction, renovation, repair, spanning thousands of years, and followed by many more centuries, if not millennia, of destruction and quarrying. Who's to say exactly what was here when the ancient Egyptians established their great necropolises of Giza or Saqqara? There is no doubt that they were here. They built on these sites, and they certainly left their mark. Whether or not they truly possessed the capability to build structures like the Pyramid Valley and Sphinx temples, made with mind-bending precision and sophistication, as well as single blocks of stone weighing in at over 400 tons, or whether they were even capable of building the pyramids themselves, I'm highly skeptical. Based on the archaeological evidence, what they wrote, the scenes on the walls that they drew, and the tools that we found, there is very little evidence to support it. There are no scenes on any walls showing stone pyramid building, nor of the logistics that are involved with moving 400-plus ton blocks of stone. But we do have scenes of other, more primitive construction activities. Scenes of woodworking, of using sticks, rocks and sand to shape alabaster vessels, and of them making mud bricks, presumably for ramps or perhaps even to make the mud brick pyramids of the Middle Kingdom. The tools that have been found in the archaeological record are primitive. They can't explain the machining and cutting witness marks that are still found on megalithic architecture, nor the precision and sophisticated geometry of blocks and artifacts made from very hard stone. What we can see here is a tale of two industries, one that is relatively primitive, understandable and explainable by the tools we found and the scenes that have been carved on walls by ancient Egyptians, and another that is far more mysterious, sophisticated, complex, precise, and megalithic, with no evidence suggesting that the dynastic Egyptians possessed the tools, knowledge, or capability to create it. The shore rocks of Point Perrin, which is near Perth in Western Australia, were studied by Ernest P. Hodgkin, and his findings reported in a paper titled Rate of Erosion of Intertidal Limestone in the Annals of Geomorphology, published in 1964. The limestone notch that was studied by Hodgkin at Point Perrin actually faces inshore, and it was sheltered from the full impact of the waves, but it's still a high-energy erosive environment given the 24/7 nature of water action working on the stone. Stainless steel rods were driven into the rock at 3 levels, and casts were made of the rock surface, including the rods, when they were placed there in August of 1953. Casts were again taken in February of 1956 and once again in January of 1962. The amount of rock lost due to wave and water action was measured by comparing the profiles of the casts. Quoting from Hodgkin's paper, quote, "From these data it is evident that there was progressive erosion over the whole of this nearly vertical rock surface, but that rate differed greatly with level. It was highest at the lowest level and decreased rapidly above this. The highest rods are above high water mark, except sometimes in winter, but must normally be wetted daily by waves and splash. The lowest rods are a little above mean sea level and are covered daily, except occasionally. At this level, the mean rate of erosion was 1 millimeter per year, a figure that again is very close to estimates from limestone shores elsewhere." End quote. So, from Hodgkin's paper, the highest rate of erosion, which was found at the lowest rods, just above mean sea level, that was measured over 11 years, was 1 millimeter per year. Again, this was the fastest measured rate of erosion. The higher rods, still affected by water action, showed far less. If we bust out the trusty Windows calculator, not that we really need it for this, and using our 2 feet of erosion seen at Giza, which is, again, 610 millimeters, at a rate of 1 millimeter per year, that's 610 years of sea level wave action to erode 2 feet of limestone. The problem, obviously, is that it seems, let's just say, unlikely or implausible that the Pyramid Temple at the top of the causeway at Giza was covered in moving wave action water for more than 600 years at any point across the last 5,000. Hodgkin referenced another study in his paper, one done by Emery in 1941, which was a direct estimate of intertidal erosion based on dated inscriptions carved into the limestone sea cliffs at La Jolla, California. His results came in at roughly 1 foot of erosion across 600 years, which works out to 0.5 millimeters per year. This is half the measured rate of Hodgkin's paper, giving us a figure of roughly 1,200 years of wave action to wear away 2 feet of limestone. This 1,200-year figure matches the results from an Army Corps of Engineers experiment, which was started in 1912, when they constructed a navigation dike by placing large limestone boulders midstream in the Tennessee River at Watts Bar. As reported by Portland P. Fox in the Journal of the Tennessee Academy of Science, Volume 16, published 1941, when the Army Corps constructed the second stage of this cofferdam, enclosing and unwatering the dike some 27 years later, a close examination of the limestone boulders was possible. Here is Randall Carlson discussing the results.
So here, the bottom line is this, approximately 1/2 inch in 25 years. Okay, so 25 years, this is water flowing continuously. So this is another high-energy erosional environment, flowing continuously over these blocks. So 25 years, that's going to be 8, so 1/2 inch. If we're going to, move 1/2 inch in 25 years and we've got 2 feet, well, then you've got 48 times 25, or 1,200 years of water continuously flowing over these limestone blocks.
So 1,200 years for 2 feet of limestone erosion in an extremely high energy erosive environment. What about other forms of erosion in more normal environments, not subject to rivers or waves from the sea? Well, we happen to have a lot of limestone that's been conveniently accurately dated when it was carved, in the forms of headstones in cemeteries and other monuments with names and dates carved into the rock surface. Thomas C. Merdling wrote a paper for Volume 6 of the Geomorphology Journal in 1996 titled Inscription Legibility Method for Estimating Rock Weathering Rates. Quoting from his paper, "Many monuments, buildings and rock surfaces have names and dates carved into them, and these inscriptions become less legible in a quantitatively predictable manner as adjacent rock face recedes." End quote. In his paper, Merdling reports that the vertical faces of limestone monuments in Louisville, Kentucky, receded at a rate of 0.5 millimeters per 100 years. This weathering is caused by, well, weather, and to put it into comparison with Egypt, the average annual rainfall for Louisville is 47.6 inches, or 1,209 millimeters per year. In Cairo and on the Giza Plateau, the average annual rainfall is a couple of orders of magnitude less, at 28 millimeters per year, or just over an inch. Using that rate of limestone erosion, 0.5 millimeter per 100 years, or 1 millimeter every 200 years, in an environment with Louisville's average rainfall, 2 feet or 610 millimeters of weathering would take approximately 122,000 years in those conditions. Another study by J.G. Goodchild in the Geological Magazine of October 1890 also studied the rate of limestone tombstone erosion due to weathering and solution in rainfall, and I'll let Randall Carlson deliver the quote from the paper.
This is way back from 1890. The weathering of certain limestones deduced from the observed extent of waste that had affected some dated tombstones. Here we had stones that had been carved out of solid, unweathered limestone at a given date recorded upon the tombstone itself, and side by side with the date was given by the hand of nature a fairly exact record of the amount of limestone that had been carried away in solution from the general surface of each of the tombstones in question. The mean of several observations gave as the rate of solution about 1 inch in 500 years.
At Goodchild's measured rate of 1 inch in 500 years, given that there's 24 inches in 2 feet, that comes out at 12,000 years to erode 2 feet of limestone. And there's even more. F.J. North in 1930 reported on experiments ran by the United States Bureau of Standards to ascertain the solubility of limestone in water in a report titled Limestones, Their Origins, Distribution and Uses. The Bureau placed 2-inch cubes of rock on the roof of their building in Washington, D.C. Quote, after careful weighing spread over a period of about 7 years, it was found that from exposure to the weather, an oolitic limestone would lose a layer about 1 millimeter in thickness in 100 years. The loss from a compact crystalline limestone was about 1/3 less. End quote. Washington, D.C.'s average annual rainfall clocks in at 41.79 inches per year, or 1,061 millimeters. In this environment, 610 millimeters or 2 feet of limestone would take 61,000 years to disappear. Bear in mind that they also found the harder forms of limestone, which are like those predominantly used in megalithic buildings at Giza, erode at a rate about 1/3 less, which means it would take something like 80,000 years for 2 feet of erosive damage. It is worth mentioning here, as hinted at in this paper, that not all limestones are the same. Even different sedimentary layers in the same rock structure will have different levels of hardness, and this has been extensively documented in the Sphinx enclosure, as well as on the body of the Sphinx itself. The majority of the limestone that makes up the huge megalithic blocks of the pyramid structures and of the pyramids themselves is a very hard form of nummulitic limestone. There is softer limestone that's been used in some other places, something that I think is likely evidence of renovation and rebuilding in later periods, but that's a topic for another video. So, in summary, scientific research has shown that in coastal wave action environments, 2 feet of limestone erosion would take somewhere around 610 to 1,200 years. In rivers, the measured rate for 2 feet of erosion was similarly around 1,200 years. In more normal weather environments, studies have shown that it would take anywhere from 12,000 years to 61,000 years, even 122,000 years to wear away 2 feet of limestone. And these were all measurements taken in places that have over 40 inches of rainfall per year, versus the desert environment of Egypt's typical 1 inch or less, barely a sprinkle, although I have to say that I have personally witnessed it rain in Cairo a couple of times. If significant rainfall contributed to the erosion that we see on the megalithic structures at Giza and the other Old Kingdom pyramid sites, then when did that happen? It certainly doesn't seem to have been any time in the last several millennia. Quoting B.W. Sparks from page 332 of the journal Geomorphology, published 1960.
Although stream floods and sheet floods may be effective agents in the formation of semi-arid landforms, many deserts bear the imprint of even more significant water action. It seems very doubtful whether the required amount of water ever falls in present conditions, which is exactly right. And many authorities have attributed such erosion to a wetter period during the Pleistocene. For example, the valley on the west side of the Nile at Luxor, containing the tombs of the kings, appears to be a water-eroded valley. But the tombs themselves show no signs of destructive water action. This means that water action of any significance probably ceased at least 4,000 years ago.
Looking at the evidence and scientific studies, if rainfall or water had anything to do with the erosive damage found on these ancient megalithic sites, it must follow that they've been there for a very long time indeed, stretching back into periods where they were subject to intense rainfall, into the Pleistocene, and even then they had to be subject to that weathering for many thousands of years, and this is all after the protective granite casing stones had been dislodged.
There is 5 royal pyramids, and we call them 5 text-bearing pyramids. And they constitute what we call today the pyramid texts. And you're seeing one of them, that's the pyramid of Unas. You can visit today the pyramid of Teti, well, I don't know after the revolution, but it should still be open. And literally see those texts. They're the oldest religious texts in the world, by the way. And they're original, have been interpreted, translated, or they are original. And they speak again of these 2 regions of the sky. And they speak of these 2 regions of the sky, the southern sky with the stars of Orion, and can we move one slide up? Here's a nice view of them. They're pristine, by the way. It's really eerie how they carve those texts by hand, and some of the details is extraordinary. This is one of the things that's very impressive in ancient Egypt, is the precision. Everything is done. They had hundreds of these Michelangelos about, it seems. Thousands. Okay, next. And well, if you read some of it, it becomes fairly obvious that what they want is the king, or rather the dead king, through ritual, to become a star, or what you would call an astral spirit. And he would join Orion. That's Orion's belt enlarged. And you've got Zeta, Orionis, Epsilon, and Delta. Or these 3 stars of Orion's belt. For some reason, the text and the pyramid is locked into that. And you can see this position. 2 rather bright stars, and a less bright one, which is offset to the left. And can we move one slide? Pulse. That's my apple. It's just too damn weird. Two large pyramids with the little one offset. It's known now as the Orion correlation theory. And then this angle, you wanted to, well, you can't. You can't turn the stars, that's one thing for sure. You can't turn the pyramids. You could try, but the stars, you cannot move them. Well, you can. Actually, you can. You can move them if you go back in time. And here is the leap. The leap. Egyptologists said the pyramids are built in 2500 BC and that's it. And I said to Graham, let's just go and see. Whoopsie-dopsie. I mean, I'm having enough trouble with this theory as it is. And if you start talking about a different time, it's going to be bad. But what it boiled down to is this, is that we reasoned out from the text that these stars are identified to Orion's belt, and Orion's belt is identified, these pyramids, and these Orion's belt is identified to the god Osiris. And the god Osiris was supposed to have come down. 5 minutes, bad. Give me 10. Are you bored with this? You're having fun? I don't know. Having fun, huh? Let them have fun. 12. I come from Egypt. Sorry? Yeah, keep going. I have to move a bit faster here. But might not be able to do Black Genesis, but that's the fun bit. So what we said is they speak about what is known, and Andy knows very well. There's a term in ancient Egypt that is used very often to describe the origins of their civilization. They call it Zep Tepi. It literally translates as the first time. And the first time of when Osiris and Isis ruled and established pharaonic civilization. And this first time, well, when is it? And we reason that because of precession, because of this cycle. Now what happens to when you observe, you can run it on any astronomical program, they're very cheap these days. If you run it and you put the stars in the south, you'll find that they go down and they go up and they go down and they go up in cycles of 26,000 years. There is a low part, a nadir, and there is a high point. We're near the high point, by the way, now. The low point could be the beginning. Let's try it, we said. And as we went tick-tock, 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 I remember we did the program for Discovery Channel, not only they started going down, but they started adjusting themselves. And when we reach the bottom line, the nadir, 10,500 BC, blong, you get a correlation. Now, before we publish anything like this, let's make damn sure. You know, we got several programs and we tried all this. But there was something very, 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 very inviting about this, is that not only the stars are locked with the pyramids, but the Milky Way redressed itself and seemed like to be a projection of the Nile. I'll show you in a minute. And even more interestingly, they locked at a very specific time of the year, which was the spring equinox. And immediately we thought, spring equinox, that means the sun is rising due east at that time. Precisely when the stars are on the meridian. Perfect lock. And of course, immediately we said, due east, boy, there is another monument that is looking due east on that site. And that is the Great Sphinx. Can we have the next one? Here, as you can see it more in stellar terms. You can try it out. Huh? I mean, this is all falsifiable. I mean, it's not... All right, next slide. We'll have to move a bit faster. Okay. Now, not only, here is the lock. Orion's belt in the south, matching the pyramid, the Nile with the Milky Way, and the sun rising due east, and in the sky. At that time, only at that time, was the constellation of Leo. It only works for that time. There seemed to have been some sky image that was projected on the ground.